Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for taking the leadership and calling this hearing today. We need to have discussions like this on basics, and your leadership is certainly making sure that we get that type of discussion. Let me note that to our witness who was mentioning about the Mr. Sant, who was mentioning about the turning of CO2 into useful material, and we compare that to what I consider to be a sort of an irrational approach to try dealing with CO2 and just trying to eliminate CO2. You're suggesting that we actually can use CO2 in a way that will be beneficial to humankind and making a profit out of extracting it. Now, let me note that you're talking about cement. There is a company in my area, New Light, that has developed a methodology of, and they have a process now working that takes CO2 out of the air and turns it into plastic, high-quality plastic. And I think that we are going to find with research that instead of going about the regulatory and trying to stamp out the use of CO2, we're going to find it's much more effective for mankind to find useful purposes for CO2 that we can actually extract it from the air, then we don't have to worry about the debate as to whether CO2 is a pollutant or not if you actually have people using it for positive ends. So, number one, I thank you for your testimony today. I didn't know about your uses that you're suggesting that are available, and I think it deserves a lot of attention, so thank you. What also deserves attention, as far as I'm concerned, is the future of nuclear energy in this country and throughout the world. Nuclear energy had we had such great hopes for it, but it should be evident to anyone now that the former light water reactors, the initial move on stage in the nuclear arena is extraordinarily dangerous. We have closed down San Onofre in my area, and rightfully so, because there are dangers involved with light water reactors. Mr. DeWitte, does what you're trying to develop now in the nuclear energy field, does that have the same dangers?
No, very different safety profile. It operates purely on natural forces. It's very passive. It has low pressure and basically no pressure operations. So it makes it a very safe profile in terms of what it can do and behave at.
Can it melt down and release radioactivity?
Effectively, no.
So we have the capability now, Mr. Chairman, to actually do this. We've had this capability for a while, and we have instead been, well, for whatever forces at play in our society, we have been channeling resources into developing nuclear power plants that have extreme danger associated with them. And now we should understand, and the testimony today highlights this, that we should focus on our alternative, making sure the alternative that we have, which is a nuclear energy source for electricity that is far less dangerous, if not dangerous at all, we should make sure that that comes to play, and that's right through this committee. This committee will do the things that are necessary to make sure that the next generation of nuclear power, which is safer, that we get into that new generation as soon as possible. And when we're talking about that as soon as possible, do you see, Mr. DeWitte, do you see the fact that the small-scale programs, and perhaps like your own, which were provided technical support and lab capabilities, you think is that a better way for us to approach this than through large grants through the license to try to move things through the regulatory process?
I think in general it has substantial benefits for where the industry is now, and I think it is a better way because I think what we've seen is we've had very high impact and high leverage outcomes from a very small amount of money to date, much more efficiently than you would get with a large cost share program at this stage. That doesn't mean that you can't have those down the road for demonstration type purposes, but I think it's a better use at this stage.
And one last thing, Mr. Chairman, I think that it doesn't really make sense for us to be funding big companies to help them move through the licensing process, which is basically a federal process. So we're giving grants to people to help them deal with the federal agencies, and instead we should try to reform the federal agencies so that they don't have these impediments to this type of progress. Thank you very much again for your leadership, Mr.
Thank you,
Chairman.
Mr. Rohrabacher.